He is a psychologist, gerontologist, documentary filmmaker, entrepreneur, and best-selling author of 19 books. Dr. Dychtwald has shared his vision in live presentations to over 2 million people. His research and strikingly accurate predictions have been regularly featured in leading media worldwide and have garnered nearly 20 billion media impressions. As founder and CEO of AgeWave, Dr. Dychtwald has also been a highly valued advisor to many of our nation's top political and social leaders. As the world ages, every aspect of our society will be touched. This launch will transform the workplace, the marketplace, and our lives. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Ken Dychtwald.
Well, hi everybody. What a pleasure and honor to be with you here today. I think this mic may be up too loud. Does that sound a little too loud? Yes. All right, so let me ask you guys a question before I get started, and I'm mindful of the timing. You can raise your hands as a response. How many of you would like to live to 100? Raise your hand. No matter what? Yeah, a lot of hands went down. Take a moment to sit to somebody sitting near you at your table and tell them why you think the hands went down when I said no matter what. Okay. Good. So, as was mentioned, I've had sort of an irregular life. I've had various chapters. And what I'm going to do here during our little time together is to share with you some stories from Radical Curiosity, which is the book you've all received a copy of. And it is my 19th book, but it's a memoir. And it's the only time I've really written my personal stories. All my other books were about phenomenon going on, the age wave, workforce crisis, the power years. This book is far more personal. As I go through some of these stories, and I've picked just a few for our time here today, there may be something I say that will change your life forever. But you've got to be willing to hear my version of some of these issues. There may be some things that I show you that you think are ridiculous. And you never would have done them. And that's okay too. But I invite you to stay with me because I'm going to build from my early years to my current years with some different stories. Are you guys set? Yeah. So I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. There I am. High school graduation. My parents had never gone to college. I wanted to be a physicist. I got accepted early admission at a little engineering school in Pennsylvania, Lehigh University. And my junior year, I had to take a humanities course. And so this would be like 1968, for those of you who were paying attention to things in 1968. And the psychology professor had just gotten his doctorate at Stanford and was kind of hip to all sorts of crazy things. And one book after another was all about the idea that humans had enormous capabilities that were largely going unattended. And I thought the idea was incredible. There's no internet, of course, no Google, but at the end of each book's bio, Alan Watts, blah, 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 teacher at the Esalen Institute, Big Sur. Will Schutz dropped out of Harvard to be a teacher at the Esalen Institute, Big Sur. Masters in Houston, Esalen Institute, Big Sur. Abraham Maslow, Esalen Institute, Big Sur. It was the 1960s, and the United States was erupting. The war in Vietnam and the protests that followed became... Get this sound up a little bit, please. The country was rocked by the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy.
The civil rights movement was charged with a new energy and anger, and women were demanding their equal rights. The culture was also going through a revolution. For many, it was a time of make love, not war. Turn on, tune in, and drop out. Of flower power. The music scene at the time reflected and amplified this revolution. In 1969, 500,000 strong descended on Yasgur's farm at Woodstock in upstate New York, and countless hippies were flooding the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco. In the late 60s, the whole earth took on a whole new perspective. 158 miles south of the Haight was the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, which had been founded by Michael Murphy and Dick Price in 1962. By the late 60s, Esalen was known as the global mecca for the human potential movement. It attracted avant-garde thinkers such as Aldous Huxley, Abraham Maslow, Anna Halpern, Ida Rolf, Baba Ramdas, and Timothy Leary. Fritz Perls led Gestalt workshops. It was also a place for Joan Baez, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, George Harrison and Ravi Shankar to perform, as well as retreat and recharge.
So remember the last picture you just saw of me, and then here I was a couple of years later. Some of you may have your own versions of those changes. Hold on one second. This notebook just slipped. So I dropped out of college and moved to Big Sur. And for those of you who came to California from other parts of the world, you know, going down Highway 1 and seeing Big Sur is kind of mind-boggling. There's nothing like it in New Jersey. My first workshop at Esalen. I'm covered up, I'm over there, so this is okay for me to use. But I thought, where am I? Like, what is going on? And the idea is that, hey, trees don't wear clothes. We don't cover up our animals. Why are we wearing clothing? Now, would I want my kids to do something like this now? Probably not. But we did our workshops, encounter groups, Gestalt therapy, dream therapy, sensory awareness, Tai Chi, yoga, meditation, with the idea that we would untap aspects of our potentials. And most of the workshops were done without clothes. When Sigmund Freud was doing his work, he didn't really look at his patients. They lied on a couch. He sat facing the other way, took notes. I was in workshops where people were crying and yelling and screaming and arguing and grieving, but they were naked, so I could see their bodies. And I began to notice, maybe it's because I was so young and inexperienced, I had never really been in therapy or workshops before, but I began to notice that we were embodied, that the feelings we had, the hard ones, the good ones, expressed themselves through our bodies, not just our words. And I wrote Body Mind when I was 22, which came out in 12 languages. It's been out for almost a half century, all over the world. And I kind of landed on something. I was attempting to draw medicine and psychology closer together. So here I am living in Big Sur. I wish I could still find that poncho. I have no idea what happened to it. How many of you have been to Big Sur, by the way? Yeah. It's a pretty special place. And I thought, I love it here. I'm teaching workshops at Esalen, finishing my first book. I swung back and finished my undergraduate in psychology. I was working on a doctorate on the psychology of the body, the very first one that anybody had ever gotten in the world. Now the subject is kind of hot and popular, but back then it was crazy. And I thought, this is my life. You know, I had a little cabin, cost me all of $150 a month in the middle of the woods, next to a river. I thought I was like Mr. Siddhartha. And I was just going to live there and do that the rest of my life. And I know that all of you are probably thinking about your life back in the late 60s or early 70s, and I asked you for a little while just to hold on to that and let me tell you some of the stories that have unfolded for me. One morning, around 5:30 in the morning, knock, 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 knock on my door. Now, I lived in the woods. You needed a key to get across the bridge to get onto the property, so I didn't have people knocking on the door. And I look out the window, and this guy that looked like Clint Eastwood on acid. And I said, "What are you doing here?" He says, "I own this place." He said, "Well, the guy that owns it lives in New Zealand. I send him a check once a month." He says, "Well, I'm back. And I want you out." Now, what a lot of people like to remember is that Big Sur was a place of flower children and hippies and gypsy lifestyles, but it was also a place where the Hells Angels hung out, and escaped convicts hung out, and crazy people hung out. This guy was a crazy person. And he said to me, "I want you out of here." I said, "No, I have a lease. I'm going to be here for years." He said, he said, "Excuse me." And he reaches into his vest and he pulls out a gun and he puts it to my head. He says, "I want you out now. Back, why don't you get out of Big Sur?" "Yes, sir." So I left Big Sur, and a friend of mine, Gene Houston, put me together with Gay Luce, and we came up with the idea that we would create a year-long kind of human potential curriculum. This would be 1974, so 49 years ago. And the idea was that we would gather together meditation, yoga, diet, nutrition, all the things that Dean Ornish, Andy Weil, Mark Hyman are doing now. We thought, this is way before then, we would organize those into a program. And we had to make up a name. Why? Because Stuart Brand had just done the Whole Earth catalog, and Stuart gave us $5,000 to file as a not-for-profit. Should we be the Human Potential College? Should we be the Lifelong Learning Institute? We made up the phrase holistic health. And the first project we launched was the STAGE project. And that was a project in which all the folks we were going to work with would be over the age of 65. We would meet once a week for 3 hours in Gay Luce's home in Berkeley, and then they would have homework assignments an hour a day. And we were just trying to see what was possible as people grew older. In a time, I only recently learned that you guys were also starting out. But for the most part, people weren't paying much attention to older adults back in the 1970s. So we were making up exercises, and all sorts of interesting people were wandering in to co-teach our sessions. Eric and Joan Erickson, who lived in Marin County, became part of our teaching staff. Joe Campbell's ideas about mythology and personal identity. And Gay and Eugene and I were making things up. And one week I said to our group, and I was 24, so I didn't know what I was doing. I said, "Here's a piece of graph paper. When you come back next week, I want you to graph your life and then tell us about it." And people said, "What?" And I would tell you it was one of the biggest lessons of my life, because people came back the following week and they did it. And then they could talk about, they were 70, 80, and 90-year-olds. They could talk about the 20 years they spent wasted in a job that they hated, or in an unhappy marriage, or not living where they wanted to live. And I thought, wow, here I am, 24 years old, and I'm in the presence, after having lived in Big Sur and met Ram Dass and Tim Leary and all those kinds of gurus, I'm in the presence of these older people who were looking back at life and were telling me that you should live your life so that you don't have regrets when you're older. And I thought, every high school kid should take a course in aging. You guys ought to teach courses in aging at the local high schools, because if you just kind of wander around for 30 or 50 years and then you get to be 70 or 80 and you look back, you might say, huh. And by the way, later on in our time together, I'm going to talk to you about leaving a legacy. Then, in the early 1980s, there used to be a think tank, a part of the US Congress, and I got asked to be an advisor. It was called the Office of Technology Assessment. And the idea of it was not to think about older people or one's own aging, but to look at aging as a demographic phenomenon. And what I mapped out was that throughout the last 1,000 years, the average life expectancy had been relatively low. And then during the 20th century, due to breakthroughs in medicine and public health and pharmacology and refrigeration and all sorts of things, self-care, people started living longer and longer and longer. The average person could expect to live a long life. And that had never happened before. In fact, Leonard Hayflick, who discovered the biologic clock within the human genome, shared with me that throughout 99% of human history, the average life expectancy worldwide was under 18. So there have always been some 40 and 60 and 70-year-olds, but they were very rare. When we signed our Constitution, the median age in America was 16. And all those characters, you can think of the painting of the signing of the Constitution, were wearing white wigs because it was believed that the older you were, the wiser you were, and the more power you had. So that was a time in history where people wanted to look and act and be perceived as older people because it was in to be old. That changed in the 20th century. Then I hopped out of the not-for-profit sector in the 1980s, and there was a word that, how many of you worked in the not-for-profit sector in your career? How many of you worked in the for-profit sector? Well, when I hopped over into the for-profit sector, first I cut my hair and took out my earrings and bought some suits, decided that the hippie me was not going to make it. And as I started working with companies who were curious, usually the chairman and CEOs were curious about demography, I heard the word growth. Now, if you're in the not-for-profit sector, growth is not a big deal. If you're running a senior center and you have 1,000 people that visited your center last year and 1,000 people this year, that's fine. But if you're Pepsi-Cola and you have the same number of people using your product this year as last year, your stock value goes down. So I said, what if we looked at aging and demography from the point of view of growth? So I looked at the 1950s and I thought, wow, would have been a great time to be in the markets for kids' books, hula hoops, kids' toys, Barbie dolls, childhood education. Then the next decade, the teen years. And as you can see, the pattern is obvious. And look where we are now. And this is totally predictable. So what's going to be happening, I thought back in the early 1980s, is that there will be colleges like this one. There will be adult education. There will be more geriatric medicine. There will be movie stars who will be 70 and 80. There will be people running for president who will be 80 years old. And people said, no, that's never going to happen. We're a youthful country. I said, yeah, but look where we're going. And then I said, is this a US phenomenon? And take a look at the United States and Canada and much of Asia. But then if I project to 2050, the developed world is all about to be transformed by what we call the age wave. It may surprise you to know that 2/3 of all the people who have ever lived past 65 in the entire history of the world are alive today. And what I've learned now, working in this field for 49 years, started when I was 24, I'm now 73, is that most older adults, not necessarily you guys, but most older adults are kind of clueless about what they're going to be doing with their lives. The average American retiree, we've got 70 million retirees, the average American retiree watched 70 hours, 37 hours of television a week, and only 24% volunteer. Most retirees don't know what they ought to be doing. We haven't thought about that. We haven't envisioned a third age to life. When people think of the future, I realize they often think of the Jetsons' future. Cool young people with cool technology. And I thought, is that the future? It's part of it. Tech, 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 tech. But then I saw this picture in the New York Times. Little guy in the middle is Bradley, he's 3. Sitting next to him is his mom, she's 27. Standing above is the grandmother, she's 49. Next to her is the great-grandfather, he's 73. There's the great-great-grandmother, she's 95, and there's the 6th generation of this family. So when people think of the future, they're inclined to think we're all going to stay young and we'll have cool tech. I can tell you that we may or may not have cool tech, but we're going to have 6th generation nation. Then, a couple of decades ago, I knew John Glenn. I testified beside him in Washington with my suit on. And I got asked by CNN to provide commentary when he announced he was going up into space at 77. And I listened to his first interviews, and he was a tough guy, Glenn. And all the young reporters were kind of poking at him. Don't you think you're a little too old for this? You know, what if you have to go to the potty? What if your head blows up? And Glenn turned to these young reporters and he said, hey, just because I'll be 77 doesn't mean I still don't have dreams. And the psychologist in me perked up. Because even Eric Erickson, who wrote the 8 Stages of Life, 5 of them were childhood. We haven't really created a psychology of maturity. We haven't really created purpose for 70 and 80 and 90-year-olds. Now, you guys are a shining example of what's possible. But by and large, no. And I thought, in our youthful thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, we imagine that our children, or we when we were young, would have dreams. And you either fulfill them, congratulations, or you don't, sorry. What Glenn was suggesting is that if you're going to live a long life, there's time for new dreams. And then, last year, went to see Top Gun. And whether you like Tom Cruise or not, he was 59 when he was doing all those stunts and filming that movie. And I Googled it up. How many of you remember the movie Cocoon? Right, Wilford Brimley was a little old man that started that movie. He was 49 years old. And I realized we've got kind of a new age of aging going on. There's Martha Stewart on the cover of Sports Illustrated at 81. Harrison Ford is back as Indiana Jones at 81. Smokey Robinson has just dropped a new album at 82. The Rolling Stones have got their first new album in 18 years coming out, and they're just turning 80. And so what's happening is that we have a new age of aging taking place. Now, if you guys would be kind enough, my wife Maddie is here. Matt, would you stand up for a second? You guys would give her a round of applause. When Maddie and I got married, maybe it was having lived at Esalen when I was a younger man, I totally fell crazy in love with Matt. We got married when we were 33, both of us. It's 39 years ago, well, 40 years ago, in a couple of weeks. And the night of our wedding, we were broke. And we stayed at a little bed and breakfast in San Francisco. And I said to Matt, I love marrying you. Can I marry you every year? And she said to me, people don't do that. And I said, well, you know, they celebrate Halloween every year, they celebrate Christmas every year, they celebrate Mother's Day every year, they celebrate birthdays every year, summer solstice. Why not take a few minutes and renew your vows every year. You know, marriages can get lost in the tangle of life. So I'm not going to show you all of them, but I'll show you some examples. This was our original wedding. We got married in our home in Berkeley by the singing rabbis of Marin. Then we got married Episcopalian in one of the Hawaiian Islands. Then we got married in Cabo San Lucas by a Mexican judge in a mariachi band. We got married at the top of the Chichen Itza pyramid, Marin. We got married at the Chapel of Love. I went as Elvis, Maddie was Priscilla. Got married at Esalen, that's with Al Huang. We got married Baptist in the French West Indies. Got married in St. Bart's. Maddie was pregnant there, she was telling me, and the one on the right. Got married Navajo. Married Hopi. Got married at the Continental Divide. Got married in the Essene religion in La Jolla. Got married in Bath, England by a gay Anglican priest. Got married by a dolphin. Got married in the Sea of Cambodia. Our kids were young then. They married us in Zihuatanejo and told us all the things we ought to do to be better parents and better husbands and wives. Got married in Greenwich Village. Got married in Marie Antoinette's Chapel of Love. And the last one I'll show you, we got married at our 25th in Bora Bora. And people say to me, well, how come you get married every year? And I always have the same answer. How come you don't? And maybe you don't have a partner, so you might celebrate a friendship, or a relationship to your puppy, or your relationship to your grandkids. But taking the time out of a busy life to take a few minutes and say, I love you, and to talk a little bit about, as Maddie and I have done each year, how did we do last year? You know, your dad died, or my dad died. We had a child. Economy went up, the economy went down. Our business began to take off, failed. Our marriages are like punctuation points. Another story. We're going to turn the chapter. I got asked to speak in Georgia at Rosalind Carter's mental health conference decades ago. And I'm up in front of the room, and here I am, this wise guy from Newark who went through Big Sur, who is now, you know, an age wave guru. And maybe 1,000 people in the audience, and I've been dreaming of the idea of creating an elder corps, kind of like a Peace Corps, but for older adults to help save the world. And I yelled out to the audience, Mrs. Carter, I know you're here. If you tell your husband, I got a job for him. So I worked my way back to California after the talk, and my assistant, I was out in a meeting, comes running to get me in the hall, and he says, you gotta pick up the phone, fast. So I run into the office, I pick up the phone, and I said, hi, this is Ken. He says, Ken, this is Jimmy Carter. I said, yeah, right. And he says, no, it is. I hear you got a job for me, but I got a job for you. I said, what's that? He said, I'd like to write a book about my own thoughts about aging and death. Would you be my thought partner? So I flew back and forth to Atlanta, became friends with Jimmy Carter and Rosalind. And at the end of the book, which he called Virtues of Aging, he said to me, how can I repay you? I said, you can allow Maddie and I to build a house with you. He says, no. How can I repay you? I said, that's how. So we went to Houston, Texas that summer, and 5,000 of us built 100 houses in 5 days. And I could spend hours on it, but I'm going to tell you one little story. We live in an era where there's a shortage of older men, and there's a shortage of older men role models. There's a lot of knucklehead men out there. So how does one lead? So we were all, banging away and building this house, and there were about 40, 50 people per house and other people that removed garbage, and it was very well organized. But on the third day, President Carter and I are putting in the toilet, and somebody comes in and says, Mr. President, all the houses are running behind schedule. He says, Ken, let's go up on the roof. So we went up on the roof and we started hammering the shingles. And I watched the president, who never stopped working, by the way. We were all taking breaks every chance we could because it was 105 degrees out. He didn't. It was biblical. He starts hammering fast and loud. And all of a sudden, everybody on our roof starts hammering fast and loud. And then all the other 99 houses, people start working faster and louder. Not one word was said, but all the houses got done by the next day. Last section. What led me to write a memoir was my fascination with, sort of like if you're going on a camping trip and there's some people returning. It's not a bad idea to ask them, hey, you've been up ahead, are there any rattlesnakes? Are there any beautiful places to catch the sunrise? Is there any fresh water to be found? You don't have to take any of their experience, but it might be useful to have some of their life lessons. Here's a program in Brazil and Chicago. Sound?
Hello, hello.
Who is that?
Heidi.
Thank you.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
It's the first time that I'm talking with someone from another country.
I'm very excited to be doing this.
I look like I'm only 25, but I'm 88.
I'm with my old brother. He has 23 years.
Do you know, instead of saying he has 23 years, you could say he is 23 years old.
I tried to go to Lollapalooza that we have next week, I think, in Brazil, but my mom didn't let me.
You got a good mom.
Good morning, dear Julia. Good morning to you. This is your dad?
That's me and my wife when we were young.
Oh, you were good looking when you were young. And he's still good looking.
If you could just dream and have whatever you want, what do you think you would like to be doing?
I see myself in big family, with a beautiful wife. And I want to thank you for this change of experience. You are incredible.
Obrigado.
You are my new granddaughter.
I love you.
I love you too.
And if you were here, I would give you a big hug.
Oh yeah, let's hug. Oh.
Bye.
Bye.
Great, right? So around the same time that my dad had passed away, we were doing a study at AgeWave on inheritance, and nobody wanted to talk about inheritance in the focus groups. So I whispered in to the moderator, ask if people want to leave a legacy. It's just a word. Everybody wanted to talk. So we did a massive survey on what are the key elements of leaving a legacy. Now they may be different for you, but take a look what we learned. Money and property definitely matters, but not so important. Next, personal possessions of emotional value, somebody's ring or dad's baseball glove or a house by the lake. Next, more important, instructions and wishes to be fulfilled, to be shared so that your spouse or your children will be looked after in certain ways. But most important were values and life lessons. More important, almost double, money. So that's what got me to think of writing a memoir for my own kids, or one day if they have kids, we become grandparents, Matt and I. Who is that grandpa guy? But it takes some time to gather your life lessons, and maybe each of you should join into teams and clubs to help each of you craft your life lessons. Not just what did you do, and did you make Woodstock, or did you have a business? But what did you learn? Wait. Back in 1977, before there was easy ways to record people, I flew back to New Jersey and filmed my grandmother for a week. Grandmother was sort of a peasant woman, was only semi-literate. She grew up in New Jersey, but her people were from Russia. And here's just a couple of minutes of that interview. And by the way, you'll see me at one point, I had a really big belt buckle. I was 27.
All right. First of all, how old are you?
Well, that I wouldn't know. Because when I was born, my mother passed away, and there was no record of me.
But do you figure you're over 60?
Oh, yes.
Figure you're over 70?
Oh, yes.
Figure you're over 80?
That I don't know. Around that age, I think. I was in the orphan asylum in Elizabeth. I don't know how long I was there. I stayed there quite some time. And then when I got a little older, whoever took me in, I boarded with them.
How old were you then? Were you very little?
Oh, I was a little girl yet. In my bare feet. Half the time we didn't have no shoes. We had no electric lights. We used to burn kerosene lamps. And there was no bathtubs. And the bathroom was about a block away from the house. You had to use a lantern to go out there at night.
If there's a kind of message you'd like for all of us children and grandchildren to live on later on, 20, 50 years from now, what do you want us to learn from you that we can continue doing?
To be good, honest, respectable, and live happy with your families. Like I lived happy with my husband.
You're a sweetie, Clara.
That's enough?
For now, we got a few.
Check the buckle. All right.
I don't know you because you want to remember me. And you like me. Right?
That's right.
That you love me.
I do love you.
And I love you too. From the minute you were born, I loved you. And find a nice girl and get married and I'll love you double.
All right, now where's my friend Gary? If people have questions, if you'd write them down on the card, raise your hand. We'll pick a few of them up and I'll answer a few. But while that's happening, it just went out. Oh, it's back. While that's happening, I'd like to invite everybody to swivel around so you're able to talk to one person at your table. Might be somebody you came with or somebody you don't even know. Hi. And share with them what I covered was my time in Big Sur, destiny knocking, throwing me out of my house, but opening up the world of gerontology, my remarrying Maddie, some lessons from President Carter, and leaving a legacy. Turn to whoever's sitting next to you and tell them, you don't have to be right and you don't have to agree. Which of all these things did you find most personally interesting? Take a moment while you're also filling out some of you cards for questions. Gary's over here. Now that I know. All right, one more minute. Hear from the other person, so make sure you share and hear. might get your attention. These works. All right, hold on, we've only got a few more minutes to go. And there's something, I got a challenge for all of you after these few questions. Give it a shot, Gary.
Now we have some good technology. Hello. Okay, first question. Why do you think you became interested in older people when you were so young?
It was serendipity, it was an accident. You know, nowadays our kids who are 33 and 36 believe that you envision things and then they manifest. So much in my life happened because something else was supposed to happen and it didn't. We were going to do this SAGE project with young people, and Gay Luce's mom got sick with hypertension. She tried biofeedback on her and deep breathing and some yoga, and she got better. So Gay says, let's just work with old people. And I said, I don't think that's for me. I'll do that for a few months and then I'll move on. That was 49 years ago. But I will tell you that the aging subject continues to evolve. Originally it was helping older people be more healthy, and then it was trying to imagine how the world was going to change, and then it's been guiding companies and governments all over the world, from the United States to Singapore, on how to prepare for the aging of the population. And then it's throwing out challenges to the world, and I'm going to throw out a couple to you guys before we break. But so it was an accident. It was serendipity. I hadn't envisioned that. A week before, I would have said, I'm going to be working with older people for 50 years. Thank you.
All right. What about this? What will children being born today have to deal with psychologically to survive?
Well, what will children have to deal with psychologically to survive? I don't know, but I'll offer an opinion. I'll mention three things. One, I don't know if it's the next year or 3 or 4, but certainly in the next 20 or 30, there are going to be breakthroughs. As biotechnology becomes information technology, it gets subject to Moore's law, which means it becomes twice as powerful every 18 months at half the cost. So there are going to be breakthroughs so that for some people, living to 120 or 150 will become commonplace. So for young people, they ought to be thinking about a 100-year life at least, not a 60 or 70-year life like we did watching our grandparents. That's point one. Point two, young people really got whacked hard during COVID. Well, older people have been portrayed as the most struggling of the age groups, but as it turns out, in all the studies we've done and others have done, older people have more resilience. They may not look great in a bikini anymore like the 30-year-olds, but older people have got safety nets. Market value of Medicare is about $13,000 a year. Average Social Security payments, $20,000 a year. Young people have no safety nets. And having to live in a time with such bizarre leadership, so many terrible things going on in the world, an absence of concern about the future of the planet itself, I think young people are going to try to learn how to be mentally okay. I look at the rates of mental illness and depression among young people, especially young girls, and terrifies me. I think it's dangerous. And third, we run the risk of becoming a gerontocracy, meaning that older people kind of get power and stay in power. And good for them, they're pioneers. But I think we've got to create a world where the needs and feelings of 25-year-olds and 30-year-olds and the cost of college debt, and I think anybody going to medical school ought to get it paid for free, and I think it ought to be easier to buy a home, and interest rates are wigging out young people, and got a lot of tech companies that figured out that they can make you jerky with FOMO. How many of you know what FOMO stands for? Right, you all should, because it stands for fear of missing out. It's the #1 psychological problem among young people. They spend about 160 times a day checking their devices. Do people like them? Are people having more fun than them? Do they look as pretty as they could look? And I think we are creating a world with AI and with machine learning and with tech that is particularly rough on young people. So, and our older gerontocracy doesn't much worry about that as much as it ought to. So I think that it's a new future coming, and I think those of us in positions of power and leadership, a friend of mine, Chip Conley, you might have read Chip's book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. He talks about being a mentoring, but also interning, learning from young and teaching back and forth, or else older people will be missing the point about what younger people are frightened of and dreaming of.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you think younger people are more, amenable to new ideas than the older people are? You believe that?
Are younger people more amenable to new ideas than older people? Many. And many older people are not curious any longer. They just want to tell stories about back in the day, or tell you about, I'll give you an example. About 8 or 9 years ago, we had a new gal working in our company, and she was half black and half Mexican. And I said to her, why don't we spend some time teaching each other about music? And she said, okay, fine. How are you going to do that? I said, I'll teach you about a musician that I'm very fond of, Marvin Gaye. She wasn't familiar with Marvin Gaye. She says, and I'm going to take a half a year to teach you about Kanye West. And I said, not interested. And she said, no. This has got to be an exchange. So I think that a lot of us who are older, we could have the bearing where we can decide what of younger people's lives we have a little bit of interest in, hence the curiosity. And by the way, I'd say any of you who are here, remain curious or like to learn. But I'm going to push out now, because we've only got a few more minutes. I'd love to see more coming out of this group and this school that's not for other older people, but where you arm up as like an elder corps and help young inner city kids who may not look like you, may not pray like you, may not love like you. Help them learn about money, help them learn about life, help them get through hard times, give them some hope during such crazy times that we're living in. I think that there's a lot more we could be doing than a friend of mine, Mark Friedman, refers to it as age apartheid, when we divide up all the generations. And last thing I want to say is we have had a tendency to refer to old and young. If you saw that picture of the 6 generations, old and young is very 1950s. We've got lots of generations of old and middle age and late adulthood and late childhood and younger people and then older versions of younger people. It's become a much more spread out set of life stages than we've ever seen on this planet.
Great. Now,
thank you. We have time for some more. And I want to make one final comment too. So,
okay, what have been the 3 greatest influences on your life?
Maddie, and Maddie. I would say, in all honesty, Maddie's number 1. I've been very lucky. I've been in a great relationship with an extraordinary woman, and we've been business partners, and second and third would be our 2 kids, who are feisty and ornery. Our son is married to a Chinese woman. He lives in China. Our daughter is quite the character. She lives in LA, and they teach us a lot. And we have a closeness and a bond. So I'd say those are the most important people. On the professional side, I had two great mentors, Robert Butler, who founded the National Institutes on Aging, and Maggie Kuhn, who started the Grey Panthers. And I feel like I'd like to think that on a good day, I'm trying to live up to both of them.
I'd love to see the Grey Panthers visit and talk. That would be good. That would be fun. Okay.
One more?
One more. Continuing to study and learn is one way to stay vital. What are other ways?
I'm going to be honest with you. I'm sort of in that bind myself personally right now. I've just finished 50 years of working hard, and I'm toying with working a little less hard, having fun, playing more. And I don't really remember how to do that. I've been working so long, and it's been such a part of my nature. But what I've learned is that people really enjoy, as do we, time with friends and family. And they also enjoy removing the toxic family and friends from their life. And that's something people have never really thought about, that you can live a long life, some people you want to get out of your life. What else? Giving. Studies have shown that people who give to others, and not necessarily, oh, I give to my grandkids, not necessarily the giving to your own clan, but the giving to people different than you, raises people's mental health, physical health, and longevity. I think it's really important. I think it's a piece of the puzzle. By the way, I want to point out that we're in a new frontier. Everything about this is different. You know, the length of time it takes for traffic lights has changed. We're geared to this movement patterns of young people. The chairs you're sitting on were designed for the body of young people. The sound systems in public environments were geared to the ears of young people. And even our notion about what you're supposed to do when you're 70 was geared to a young world. So this is the frontier. And so dreaming up new things, which I love to do, it keeps me awake at night, I think is part of the challenge of an extraordinary organization like yours. Not only how do we keep ourselves curious, and how do we keep ourselves feeling okay, but let's look around. You know, I looked it up last night. Marin has got an almost 8-year higher life expectancy than the rest of America. You're living in a very privileged part of the world, and good for you. But also giving some of that out, giving some of that back, for whether it's money or wisdom or skills or mentoring or just holding somebody's hand who's frightened. There are roles for older people that have not yet been dreamed of or actualized. And unfortunately, we have people running for political office who are older themselves. So what I notice is they avoid topics pertaining to aging because they don't want the other networks to poke at them and say the reason he or he is focused on that is because he or she or they are old. But there's major challenges in front of us. By the way, I would say too that the most frightening disease for people over the age of 50, you know what it is, don't say it, it's cognitive loss, it's brain ill health. And I have not seen the older generation rise up and say we've got to eliminate Alzheimer's and related dementias. Maybe we won't get there for us, but for future generations. So how does this older generation lead the way for next generations is really where I'm sitting a lot these days. Can I say one thing before we wind up?
Yes.
In addition to thank you for your questions, I wish we had more time. I'm going to ask you guys to think about one word that this last 58 minutes makes you think. Of all the things I've said or you've thought or somebody at your table mentioned, just one word. And I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. I'm going to call on a few people. Not for a speech, not for a monologue, just for the one word. Yes, please.
Radical.
Radical.
Family.
Family.
Mentor.
Mentor. Yes, please.
Giving.
Giving.
Love.
Love. Yes, sir.
Courage.
Courage. Great word. Yes, sir.
Potential.
Potential.
Legacy.
Legacy. And yes, in the back row? Legacy. Is your name Joanne? No. Your name?
Your name is?
Right, sorry. A couple more, yes, please. Evolving. Yes. Hope. Yes, please. Curiosity. Yes, please. Expanding. Last one. Challenge. Okay, so I want to say, first of all, congratulations to all of you for making it through all the decades that you've survived and lived and thrived and lost and gained and struggled. And thank you for allowing Manny and I and my chief of staff, Robin Reynolds. Robin, you want to let everybody give you a round of applause? I just want to thank you guys for allowing me to share some ideas and to try to piece some things together in my own mind. Thank you very much. Enjoy. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. And now let's get seated because Josh Coleman is going to be fantastic, as he always is.
Thank you very, very much. I have some,
Oh,
if you could say, bring back some memories, I hope
book. I will. I'll get off the stage. Josh, go for it.